It is recommended that you watch this tutorial at the very end of the process of preparing to conduct the interview, because it will be helpful to you to be prepared for what could or might not happen, and therefore to be ready to do it. So what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the interview process based on an interview I conducted with my sister, Christine Johnson. Okay? Prepare for two possible interview patterns that may come up. One is the interviewee gives brief answers but shares a little beyond what the basic question asks about. If that does happen, be ready to ask follow-up questions to get him or her to share more information. But often, once the interviewee warms up, gets used to the process of the interview, she or he will share much more information. So don't be surprised if suddenly it goes from being kind of very quiet and unready to share to a lot more information. That can happen. Some people, it's going to be hard for them to talk about something that is, first of all, years ago. But second, some people are kind of awkward about sharing with somebody something that they went through that was very, very powerful for them, or something that they don't feel that their experience was quite the standard expected experience. In some cases, people feel like they should have felt a lot more, should have done a lot more, experienced a lot more, and they didn't, and that's okay. But again, the person chosen for you to interview should have been somebody who did have something unusual or unique to share about that day. The other possibility is the interviewee shares a great deal more than your first question asks about, covering some of your other questions. If that happens, it's really important to look over your questions, be familiar with them, and be prepared to skip some of your planned questions, but ask follow-up questions that get to him or her or him to share more about great events that took place that they're talking about. So they may mention something to you in their discussion that seems very different from what you've heard from other stories about 9/11. That's what you want to ask more questions about, and you want to draw more information about. It may be that the other information that they're sharing with you is really great, but you nevertheless may want to pull more information, even from the very talkative person, about something unusual about their day or what happened in the days after. Now, the important thing to do, particularly if you have somebody who has a lot to say, is good notes. You are going to lose a lot of the great details if you don't take notes, even if they're brief memory reminders to you that, oh yeah, he or she said this, or she or he said that, and you want to make sure that those details are there. It's okay to go back to the person after this. In fact, I'm planning to share this tutorial with my sister so she can look it over and give me her feedback. It may not be in time for me to finalize it, but at least she'll have a chance to comment on it. Okay, so let's look at Mr. Mroz's planned questions again. Note that he was prepared to ask, that I was prepared to ask good questions to lead my sister if she was brief in her answers, rather than ready to share a lot of detailed memories. He actually added a new first question that isn't on the set that's saved for you, because he realized there was an information gap, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so this may look familiar. This is the set of questions that are up in Google Sites for you to take a look at. So one question that I did add that I asked at the beginning was, what was your job in September 2001? One of the reasons is that at one point, Chris Johnson worked as an English teacher, high school English teacher, in both traditional classroom and alternative high school settings. But then she also served as a technology person for New York City school system. And so that was an important question to ask. But again, where were you that morning? When did you first learn about the attacks? What did you think had happened? What did you do at the time? Did you call anyone, or did anyone call you? Did your workplace close? If not, when did you leave? How long did it take you to get home? Was it longer, faster, or the same as usual? How did you find out that some of your neighbors who worked in or near the World Trade Center were missing? Remember, that was a key detail that I was aware of for the person I was interviewing. What did you do to help the families of the victims of the attacks? What was your reaction in the days after 9/11 to what you experienced that day? And what is your reaction now to what happened on 9/11? Okay, so that's the questions that we're going to be looking, that I was planning to ask, and we'll take a look to see what happened. So what happened during the actual interview that I conducted with my sister? Well, I'm going to show you the first clip from that interview that runs about 5 minutes long, and I want you to look to see what happened during the actual interview compared with what questions I had prepared to ask. So, what was your job in 2001?
I was Director of Technology for an alternative high school program in New York City.
So, were you working on a site or were you traveling all over?
I traveled around to 32 different sites.
Okay. So, where were you on the morning of September 11th?
I was in Manhattan on West 56th Street and 10th Avenue in my office.
Okay. So, when did you first learn about the attack on the North Tower?
As I walked into the building, into the general area, the principal secretary came running out and said that one of the twin towers had just been struck by a plane.
Okay. What did you think was happening when you first heard the news?
I thought it was probably one of those small little planes that went into the towers by accident, which happens periodically. So I didn't think too much of it initially, but then when the second tower got hit, we knew. But we were all gathered in the conference room, glued to the TV at that point for basically the entire day.
Okay.
And we saw the towers come down.
So you weren't working with students at the time?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No.
So you saw it on a large TV, small TV?
It was a fairly small TV.
Everybody was crowding around?
Yeah, oh yeah.
What were people thinking?
I think everybody was in shock, actually. I don't think there was too much thinking going on initially other than, what? You know, it was just one of those weird things that just was like getting kicked in the solar plexus or something. You gasped and you kind of didn't really digest it all immediately.
Okay. So what did you do at the time? You just basically stayed and watched what was going on?
We stayed and watched till both towers had come down, and of course we were looking at follow-up reports and stuff. But I did go out on 10th Avenue to get lunch. And when I was walking along the street, and there were a few of us who went together, what was striking was the absolute lack of noise. New York is one of the noisiest cities going. There wasn't the sound of a single horn honking. There were no cars, basically, other than a couple of taxis. People were walking along the streets completely like spaced out and shell-shocked, I guess would be the term. Nobody was talking. It was eerie. It was kind of like a Magritte painting or something like that in terms of the effect it had. And that just blew me away because it was so out of character for the city. The sun was shining. You could hear the birds chirping, like you can now. And it was just absolutely amazing because you never heard the birds chirp in Manhattan because there was too much noise around to be able to hear them over it. It was an eerie experience, to say the least.
Did you call anyone, or did anybody call you in connection with the attacks?
Oh yeah. My ex-husband and I were on the phone with each other. He was at a site in the Bronx. I had dropped him off that morning on my way into Manhattan, and basically he determined that he was going to try and find his own way home, because at that point, all the roads leading out of Manhattan were shut down.
So now, how late did you leave?
I didn't leave till I think 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or two or three. I don't remember exactly, but we had received instructions that we were supposed to stay there for the whole entire school day. And I think actually we usually got out at around 2. I started at 8, or 8,
okay,
or 7:30. But initially all the bridges were shut down. So I was looking at possibly sleeping on somebody's sofa after like a 3 or 4 mile walk. However, at 2:30 I heard, around 2 o'clock I heard that the George Washington Bridge had been opened. So I figured I'd give it a shot. If worst came to worst, I'd cross over the GW and head north on the Jersey side, and then come over the Tappan Zee Bridge back into Westchester and be able to get home that way. But I lucked out. They had forgotten to close the Henry Hudson Bridge on the way out of Manhattan. They had it closed on the way in. So I actually got home in record time. Made it
Okay.
home faster than usual.
Yeah, because
And got there as my ex-husband was trudging down from the corner to the house. He had almost made it home, but he'd been traveling for about 3 or 4 hours.
by what means?
They had buses,
Okay, so you took different
walking.
things, yeah.
It was all sorts of weird stuff. Train, because Metro North, I think, was running limited schedules and distances, so whatever.
So, picking up from where the video left off, two things that came across to me and that should come across to you from watching that first clip is that Chris Johnson shared a great deal more than my first few questions asked about, and they covered some of the later questions. I did ask some of my questions, but as I was looking at my questions as she was speaking, there were some that I just automatically skipped because she had already answered them, and that's really important. You don't want to ask a person again about something they've already talked about. It'll just seem very jarring to the interviewee, but it can also just kind of lose the train of thought. So be prepared to keep up with what the interviewee is saying. She or he is going to be sharing his experiences on 9/11, and therefore it's really important. So she shared a lot of, from the start, I took really good detailed notes so as not to lose any of those great details. Now here's an important factor. Remember, I videotaped this interview. So during the actual video, because it was being recorded and therefore I didn't want to stop what she had to say and had the benefit of not having to stop, I went back and watched the video over and over again to take down very detailed notes. When you look at the profile that I will be sharing with you in the next section of this project, I want you to pay very close attention to the fact that there is a lot that is not included because of length, and that's really important. There's a lot of great details. You have to choose which to include and which not to include, because remember, you have 1 to 2 paragraphs, long paragraphs. Granted, they can be 6, 7 sentences long, but you don't want to have a paragraph that's a page long, and so that becomes really important. Therefore, your notes become really important so that you don't spend too much time speaking about things. Now there is one thing that I want to point out. Chris Johnson, in the interview, referred to something, the people on the streets not talking, being silent, being like a Magritte painting. These are 3 of the most well-known. There are many 3 well-known Magritte paintings that capture something of what she was referring to. The picture on the left is the one that is, if any, is going to be the most familiar to you. It shows this picture of a person where we don't see the expression on their face. We don't hear what they have to say. It's these surreal paintings. The one in the center, likewise, show people being present but not being present. And the one on the right, I think, is a really great one of the backs of people's heads. We can't tell from the image what's going on, so it gives that sense of things. Okay, but be prepared for surprises. Okay, here's a fact. I had some information in my summary that you've already seen that does not match up with the facts, as you will see in the second clip. Remember, I recruited my interviewee, but the fact is I did not check my facts about her actual experience. I went from memories and from things that maybe someone else had said to me that wasn't quite accurate to what she had expressed. I was under the impression that several of her neighbors were never disappeared, never came home from the 9/11 attacks, and that is not the case. So, as we'll find out in a second. Near the World Trade Center were missing.
Oh, so long ago. It was just, the buzz went around the neighborhood. People talked to each other, and, you heard stuff. And then you heard about all the great escapes, that people who were supposed to go to work that day ran late and missed it, or called in sick, or had a meeting outside the building. But my one neighbor, he worked in Stamford, Connecticut, and he had a meeting in the Twin Towers that morning. And I think it was on the 60-something floor. And he had been in the military, and I think he had been a former firefighter, if I'm not incorrect. And so when the towers were hit, because of his training, he decided he was going to walk down. He wasn't going to trust the elevators. But pretty much everybody else on the floor took the elevators down. They got out. He didn't.
So
He died walking down.
Wow.
He was there when the second plane hit.
So
and the tower collapsed.
When the tower collapsed.
When the tower collapsed.
So, how many people in your neighborhood were unaccounted for, or?
Well, he was the only one that I knew of that lived in my immediate area.
Right.
I knew of other people, around who were missing or whatever, and I knew firefighters who went in to help with putting out the fires and everything else, and they survived. And I had conversations with some of them about it and what the situation was like being there. And they said basically that their boots would start to melt. The soles of their boots would start to melt from the heat.
So if you look at the summary again, some of the things that were included are perfectly accurate, but the last part is not. The fact that several of her neighbors did not come out at night, and she had to console the families of those who did not return. In fact, one of the questions I did not ask was what she had done to console the families of those who did not return, in part because only one person from her immediate neighborhood was a victim, and she may or may not have had a role in supporting the family after the fact, but that was not a key thing. So reactions then and now. So you're going to be asking the person as a specific question what their reaction to what she or he experienced was on 9/11 and in the days that immediately followed, and what the person's reaction is now in hindsight, looking back almost 20 years at what they went through. And it's going to be interesting to see how people's perspectives change. Some people's immediate reaction may have been filled with fear and worry or even anger, and those reactions may have changed with time. The goal is really for you to see how a person's experience change. Do they experience change? Do they feel exactly the way they did then, still filled with fear or worry, or are they now experiencing something much more removed and in hindsight? So we're going to take a look at the final clip from the interview, which shows her reactions then and now, and the fact I'll share with you, I found my sister's reaction surprising, and I will share a little bit more about that after we watch this clip.
We're driving by with bottles of water and passing them out, and passing out sandwiches and all this other stuff, and the spirit of people in New York that day and for the days after, was just absolutely amazing. People were kind to each other, and they didn't care what nationality or ethnicity anyone was. People helped each other, and that was the beautiful part of it. You know, in the midst of all that ugliness, there was that kernel of beauty that people were kind to each other and helped each other.
So what was your reaction in the days after 9/11 to what you experienced?
It felt like somebody in my family had died. I was in mourning. My daughters would see me sitting in front of the news on TV and come running with a box of tissues because I was like the waterworks. And that went on for quite a while, particularly as they were, posting pictures of the people who were missing and giving little biographies on them. I would just sit there sobbing. I was lucky, though. I had a cottage in Connecticut that I could escape to on weekends, and I just got away to try and recharge my batteries elsewhere where there weren't as many reminders and stuff. So,
did it affect your work in the days after when you would go on sites?
Well, obviously everybody was buzzing about it and talking about it and sharing experiences. I went from site to site to site, delivering software and instructing staff on how to use it, and sometimes bringing equipment, and sometimes just checking in with them to see how they were doing with technology and all the rest of that. But in those days, everything was about 9/11. Everything was a conversation. And then a couple of months, well, maybe it's not a couple of months, maybe it was a month and a half after 9/11, I had a workshop to attend in the Treasury building, and the cafeteria in the Treasury building overlooked Ground Zero. So I had a really bird's eye view of what was going on there, and they were in the middle, of course, of trying to clean up and, take care of stuff. But it was one of those interesting things. But even the people at work knew Chris was like the waterworks, get the tissues out, because if something came up, I would just sit there and cry. I guess I was in a state of depression for a while afterwards.
Yeah, what is your reaction now to what you experienced then and what happened then?
Well, there's a sense of pride in how New York handled it, but there's still that sense of loss of it was a terrible thing, and I still feel the emotions of that time. You can probably hear it in my voice.
Oh yeah.
I went to memorials afterwards, of course, and they were very, very emotionally draining. And for a long time, I had American flags attached to my car. And I'm not one to go in for that kind of paraphernalia on a normal basis, but after 9/11, I felt the need to express that. And I wore a flag pin every day for a year. I had a whole collection of them, different ones for different outfits, but I had a flag pin on every day, and I had those flags on my car. And that is totally out of character for me, totally. But it was just one of those things that there was a sense that the country needed to pull together. And then, of course, the stories started coming out about, how the Saudis managed to get the out even when all the other planes were grounded, and then the weapons of mass destruction and all that, which was nonsense. And it was twisted around and distorted, and we attacked the wrong country, and, it was disheartening, to say the least.
So one thing that I hope you get from this was the fact that my surprise was over the sense of loss that my sister continued to feel, and the great sense of sorrow at the time and then. I've known her to be the type who can get very emotional at the passing of someone or some sense of loss. So that was not that surprising, but the level of it and the sense of reacting with the sense of needing to feel a unity with the rest of the country, which as I've expressed before, a lot of people felt the need for. So I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions as you're preparing to do the interview with the person you are scheduled to interview, please don't hesitate to contact me, come see me in class, or send me an email at jgmroz at fcps.edu, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.